Thank you for joining this edition of the Morning Record. Today we are taking a look at the local elections. Joined with us, we have staff writers Mary Ellen Godin, Matt Zabrek, Lauren Tacores, and Jesse Buchanan to wrap up all of the races in our area. And I think, Matt, we'll start with you with the 13th Senate, which seems to be the big story of the night here. What happened?
I just want to say you called this a morning record, but it's like 11:30 at night that we're shooting.
By the time it gets up, it's going to be after midnight.
All
so.
right, good point. Just wanted to make sure. Point of clarification. But
Point
yes,
of order.
yeah. Mary Abrams won over Len Suzio, taking that seat back for Democrats. Len beat Dante Bartolomeo in 2016 by a narrow margin to win that seat. Despite the district being overwhelmingly Democratic. So big win for Democrats, with statewide implications. It looks like that seat is one of many that the Democrats picked up in the Senate, and they look poised to retake control of the Senate, which is currently tied, as everyone knows. Mary was excited about that, not only about her victory, but the possibility of having a majority for the party in the Senate going forward. So
yeah, and we should note before we get into the rest of these that the results are coming in for all of these districts with the turnout, with the election day registration, with the absentee ballots.
Right.
It seems like a lot of registrars are still getting the numbers in.
Right.
So these are unofficial, but Mary declared victory in this race,
and
Len
conceded.
conceded.
Yeah.
And to Matt's point, Democrats also appear to have knocked out Republican Mike McLaughlin and Republican Tony Boucher. And Democrat Steve Cassano appears to have held his Senate seat in the 4th District, which was one of the seats Republicans were probably looking to pick up to give themselves a buffer, if they lost any of their own. So it's hard to see a path for Republicans to get back to a tie or even take control of the Senate. Back to the 13th, Matt, what was Mary saying as far as why she thinks she won this district?
Yeah, so Mary throughout the campaign, basically said that she wanted to run because she didn't feel that Len was representing the district's values, and I think that's what she expressed after winning is that her message of that. She was able to get that out to voters. Obviously, a big hurdle to climb as a first-time candidate that Mary is getting your message out and letting people know who you are and what you stand for. And she credited her team for helping her with that. Obviously, as we've reported on a little bit, there were some special interest groups that spent money to run different campaigns for her, advertisements or whatever. And on Len's side, he wasn't surprised to lose the seat, given that he's a notably conservative senator in a notably Democratic district. But he said he was surprised by the margin of victory. Obviously, as you mentioned, all the numbers are unofficial at this point, but it looks like he lost by about maybe between 1,500 and 2,000 votes. We're still counting absentee, and so that's a much larger margin than that district has ended up at. In the last several races, it's been a couple hundred votes Democrat or Republican. So he attributed the loss to the demographics as well as the special interest groups that I mentioned, spending money. Because I think a lot of special interest groups saw this as a prime seat for Democrats to take back in this election. And also one of the points that he made was, or I think it might have been his campaign manager, is that there was a lot of Trump backlash in this election, and some of the tax cuts that Trump has federal tax cuts that Trump has passed haven't had as much of an impact or benefit to Connecticut residents because of the way the state's economy has been. So the good things that Trump has done that Len is saying, haven't benefited Connecticut residents as much. So when, a senator like Len, who talks about lowering taxes or not raising taxes or giving tax cuts, people hear that and they say, Trump talked about lowering taxes or whatever, and it hasn't helped me. So that message that Len and other conservative candidates put out there didn't resonate as much with pockets of voters.
And just going through the rest of the Meriden races really quickly, there were no surprises on the House side. Obviously, Hilda was unopposed, so she'll be back, but Democrats held on to the other 2 seats as well.
Right, yeah. Buddy Altameo. Altabello, sorry.
That's all right. It's late.
It's been like a really long day, everyone. So he beat Ernestine Holloway, who ran for her first state office as a Republican. People in Meriden will remember Ernestine from her mayoral run last year now. And Kathy Abercrombie beat Lou Arata, who ran as a Republican, and the Libertarian candidate Roger Misbach. She won pretty comfortably in her district, the 83rd, which covers parts of Meriden, Berlin, and Kensington. So.
Mary Ellen, now we come to you, and probably the other big race that
this story is still developing.
Is still developing, the 5th congressional district.
Yes.
And actually, there's still, last we checked anyway, we have a winner declaring victory.
Right.
But on the other side, we have an opponent who's not yet conceding.
Not as far as I know. I have yet to check in on that.
So what's happened in the 5th district?
Well, Manny Santos is the GOP candidate, and Johanna Hayes of Waterbury is the Democrat. Manny came out with a good start, which happens in the 5th district. The small towns along the western border of the state tend to come out Republican, and so that's not surprising. I've seen that in every race, but he kept it up. Pretty high, pretty substantial, and what usually happens is the cities tends to knock that lead. Johanna started closing in pretty early, and then overcame Santos, and by 17%, there was still no clear winner. She was up 52 to 48, and I believe at 35% right now. The last I checked, she's still 52 to 48. At about 10:45, she came out. She went down to her campaign headquarters and announced basically that, they've crunched the numbers. Her vote totals have shown that Santos has no clear path.
Right. A lot of those cities that we're still waiting on, they tend to lean Democratic.
Right.
So she thinks that it's pretty safe to call victory.
Yes.
You watched some of her victory speech as well. I mean, what were some of the things that she was saying helped lead to that victory? And we should note, if the numbers hold, she'd be the first African-American woman to represent Connecticut in Congress, and also the first black Democrat from this district to go to Congress. Why does she feel that she won, aside from the numbers?
Well, she has a compelling story, and she also generated a small army of volunteers and people who wanted to support her. It was exciting. It's historic. She, says she's not going to work with Nancy Pelosi. Maybe that appealed to some voters. She also said, she's a Democrat who wants to chart a new path and a new way for Democrats. So I think a lot of that helped her. I think what's surprising to me is how well Manny did. I mean, most people thought it was going to be called at 8:30, 9 o'clock, and it's still going on.
Right, and he still feels that he's there.
Right.
And he still feels that there's a path.
Exactly.
And
I believe so. The last I talked to him about an hour ago, that's how he was feeling. It was too soon to call.
Yeah.
I mean, he spoke earlier in the night of the challenges, the obstacles, of running against someone as popular, someone on the national stage like Johanna Hayes. He was at a severe money disadvantage, and he had to try to overcome that. A candidate who could do multiple commercials a night.
Yeah,
and he wasn't even able to get one.
And he wasn't getting any support from outside the state.
No.
We've talked about this several times, but Republicans are focused on trying to save their own seats, so they didn't really seem to be making any effort for Manny to help them try to pick up one.
Right.
So, if the numbers hold, and even holding it close is, really... shows his fight in this race, and certainly again he still feels that there's a path to victory. Now we move over to Jesse, who's going to fill us in on a couple of towns, including another Senate seat we were watching, the 16th Senate, which is being vacated by Joe Markley in his run for lieutenant governor, along with Republican Bob Stefanowski. What happened for his seat?
Right. So he, when Markley vacated his seat to run for lieutenant governor, he left sort of a trickle-down effect. Rob Sampson, who is a rep for the 80th, ran for the Senate seat against Vicky Nardello, who's a former state rep, and Vicky's conceded. Sampson won that Senate seat pretty handily. He was a little far, a couple of thousand votes behind when Waterbury came in, but every town that came in, he picked up more and more votes, and then in Wolcott, he even in one district picked up 3,000 votes. So his lead kept growing as the night went on and towns rolled in. So,
and that's not really a surprising vote. I mean, we've talked about this, but he's very much in line with Joe.
Right.
Joe's had that district under pretty easy control now for the last few election cycles. So it's not surprising that they would go to another candidate who's agrees with him politically.
And then his seat, the 80th, was also won by a Republican. Gail Mastro-Francesco beat David Borzellino for that seat. The other districts in Southington look like, well, one of them, the 80th, which is a solely Southington district.
81st. You mean the 81st with Fusco?
81st, yeah. John Fusco beat challenger Ryan Rogers to keep his seat. John Fusco will be going into his second term, so he was the incumbent there. And then two districts that touch in Southington, the 103rd and the 30th, are still too close to call. Both those are obviously interesting. One involves Joe Arsimowitz for the 30th, who's from Berlin, and he came pretty close to losing his seat to kind of a newcomer last year or 2 years ago. This year he's running against Michael Gagliardi, who just got into the race early last month after the previous Republican candidate bowed out. And it looks like they were within a couple hundred votes. I think we saw last. I called.
Yeah, looked like it was closer than it was 2 years ago.
Very much so.
Very much so. Which is, again, you mean Mike Gagliardi, his opponent, got in the race just 3 weeks ago.
Right.
So this certainly seems to be a result, more a reflection of Joe and probably the party, because he's the speaker, the Democratic Party, than it is, no knock on Mike Gagliardi, but he's just somebody voters aren't, really familiar with. They're probably voting more against Joe and Democrats and sort of just give this seat to a Republican than they are Mike specifically. In the 103rd, I guess we shouldn't be surprised. I mean, that, Liz won that seat with a recount 2 years ago. I mean, that's a very moderate seat that has gone back and forth.
It's been tight races for that seat in general. I think last we heard she was up by some votes, but it looks like there will be a recount.
Yeah, she wasn't really ready to declare victory in that race. The other district that sort of touches Cheshire, which is where Liz is from, the 89th, not really a surprise, Leslie Zupkis won there against Ann Harrington.
Right. Harrington, yeah.
And Leslie talking about wanting to continue to fight against taxes, but she's sort of had that seat under control since for the last few elections.
Right.
Last but not least, we now check in with Lauren, who was covering the Wallingford races, and certainly Wallingford didn't really seem to be any surprises. The incumbents Craig's been known in Wallingford for a while, even if this was just his first term, but these are all known names that seem to have continued to win over support of their voters.
Wallingford loves incumbents.
Wallingford loves incumbents.
And that really proved true tonight. State Senator Len Fasano won in the 34th District against a newcomer, Eiley McKean from Wallingford. Although Eiley did win a couple voter districts, one in Wallingford, one in East Haven. She said tonight that even though she only got about 45% of the vote, according to the unofficial numbers, that she thought that our state primary went on a little bit too long, and that she wanted that extra time to knock on doors, reach more people, get her name out there. She did tell me last week that if she were to lose tonight, and she did, that she definitely is considering a run again in 2 years. She wants to stay involved. And the two House races in Wallingford, Craig Fishbein covers his seat is in the 90th district. His challenger, Dan Fontaine, again a newcomer, challenged Craig a little bit on his stance on small government, lower taxes. Fontaine really tried to tie a message aimed at the middle class. And Craig reacted to that, calling it socialism and all that. When I talked to Craig tonight, he claims that Fontaine told some mistruths and misrepresented his legislative voting record. But Craig managed to hang on to his seat. And then in the 85th district, again, no surprise, Mary Mashinsky hung on to her seat. She is the state's longest-serving state rep. Wallingford man, again, another newcomer, Don Crouch, challenged her. And when I spoke to him tonight, he said that although he lost, it is good to challenge incumbents. It's not good to leave seats unchallenged.
Which is also where Eiley was coming from in running against Len, who actually didn't have an opponent the last few election cycles.
Yes, the last two election cycles, Pisano did not have an opponent.
Sure, and Len appears to be in line to remain as the leader of the Senate Republican caucus, although now they're going backwards. They've lost, again, a few seats, as we talked about with Matt. As we wrap it up, also want to point out that we're not touching on the governor's race because we don't know where that's going. We may not know for days because there's now a court challenge on the election day registration voting totals, which if those have any effect means we probably won't know until the end of the week who's won, if not later. But as we wrap it up, does anyone have any other thoughts on the statewide races or the local races or any of our...
Just updating the 5th, it looks like with 40% in, Hayes has expanded her lead somewhat. She's up 53%.
Right,
over Santos.
which got to why she called the race, is she felt
Right.
that the districts that were out there favored her and that she would pull away.
So that is moving.
So we'll see. We'll see if
see.
that trend continues or if she's able to hold that. Obviously, if this somehow changes, we'll be updating our reporting to reflect, if the result somehow flips. Mary Ellen, Matt, Lauren, Jesse, thank you all for sticking around and joining me for this podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See you next year. Same time next year, knuckleheads.
Yeah, hopefully next year will be a lot faster.